What if one property could only rent from 5 different tenants instead of one? That's the power of HMO investing. In fact, rental yields on HMOs can be 2 to 3 times higher than on a standard single let. But before you rush out to turn your buy-to-let into a mini goldmine, there are important rules and steps you need to know. In this video, I'll break down what a HMO is, how to get started, the income potential versus a regular rental, plus the crucial licensing and planning permission facts using Birmingham and other areas as examples. Stick around because whether you're a newbie or a seasoned investor, understanding HMOs could boost your property income if you do it right. So what is a HMO? A HMO, which stands for a house in multiple occupation, is essentially a shared house. By definition, it's a property rented out by at least 3 people who are all part of one family, sharing facilities like a kitchen or a bathroom. It's basically what we often call a house share. Picture a student house or a home where young professionals each rent a room. That's a HMO. Importantly, these tenants have separate agreements. Usually, each pays for one room, but they share the common areas. Now, size matters. If you have 5 or more tenants forming more than one household, that's usually considered as a large HMO by law. Large HMOs come with extra regulatory requirements, and we'll get into HMO licensing in a moment. But even a 3 or a 4 person shared house counts as a HMO in basic terms. The key idea is multiple unrelated tenants under one roof. So why are investors interested in HMO? One word: income. HMOs can generate significantly higher rental income compared to renting the same property to a single family. Instead of one rent, you collect multiple rents, one per room. For example, imagine a 4-bedroom house. As a single let to one family, you might get, say, £1,200 a month. But as a 4-room HMO, renting out at £500 per room, you'd pull in around £2,000 per month. Even if you account for the higher bills and the management, the cash flow is often better with a HMO strategy. In fact, industry data shows that the average HMO yield is around 7.5%, compared to roughly 3.6% for a typical single-let property. That's more than double the return on average. Higher yields of 8 to 12% are common with HMOs, whereas a standard buy-to-let might be around 4 to 5%. Another big advantage is reducing void risk. With one tenancy, if your tenant moves out, your rental income drops to zero until you find the next one. With a HMO, it's unlikely all your rooms will be empty at the same time. Even if one tenant leaves, you still have income for the others. This diversified income means less risk of total loss at any given time. It can also mean more stability. One tenant struggling to pay doesn't leave you with no rent at all, because the others are still paying. Lastly, HMOs tap into strong rental demand in other areas. There's a growing number of students, young professionals, and others that want affordable, flexible housing, which is exactly what HMOs offer. In many UK cities, house shares are often in high demand due to rising living costs and a lack of affordable one-bed flats. By renting out rooms, you're meeting this demand and maximising the rental income per square foot of your property. Of course, HMOs come with more responsibilities. More on that later. But the higher cash flow and resilience to voids make them a compelling strategy for many investors. So how do you actually get started with a HMO? Here are some basic steps. Do your homework. Research locations that are strong demand for room rentals. University towns, city centres, or areas with lots of young professionals are a good bet. Check local council rules early. Different areas have different licensing requirements, and some might even restrict new HMOs. Also run the numbers. Estimate the total rent from all rooms versus the cost. See mortgage, insurance, bills, etc. to ensure that the deal makes sense financially. Make the property HMO ready. Not every house is immediately suitable as a HMO. You might need to invest in modifications. This can include adding fire safety measures like smoke alarms in every room, fire doors, fire extinguishers, etc. and ensuring there are enough bathroom and kitchen facilities for everyone. There are minimum room size requirements as well. For instance, a single bedroom must typically be 6.5 square metres, and councils do check this. To factor in these refurbishments, many HMO landlords also furnish the rooms to make them more attractive, such as a basic bed, wardrobe, and a desk for student lets. Essentially, you want the property to meet all safety and comfort standards that HMO regulations require. If a licence is required in your area, you'll need to apply to the council for a HMO licence before you start renting out the rooms. Typical licence applications will ask for details on the property layout, safety measures, and who will manage it. The council may inspect the house to ensure it meets requirements. Keep in mind, a licence usually lasts up to 5 years and isn't free. Councils charge a fee often, which is around about £600 to £1,000 for a 5-year HMO licence, depending on the area. Now also check that you need planning permission to use the house as a HMO. Licensing and planning are separate. You might need both, and I'll explain planning shortly. Basically, get all the legal ducks in a row before your tenants move in. With the property ready and licensed, you can advertise the rooms. You might list them individually on sites like Spare Room or Open Rent, or target groups like a group of students, depending on your strategy. Now, tenant selection is crucial. You're effectively creating a roommate group, so you want reliable people who will get along, or at least coexist peacefully. Once tenants are in, be prepared for more hands-on management than a single let. There are multiple people to deal with, possibly more wear and tear, and you'll likely include some bills in the rent, meaning you, as a landlord, will handle all the utility bills, the council tax, etc., and factor that into the rent price. Many HMO landlords hire professional management or specialist HMO letting agents to handle the day-to-day, which could be a smart move if you value your time or you're not local to the property. The key is to keep on top of maintenance. A leaky shower for a tenant is one call, but in a HMO with 5 people using it, that's an emergency. So regular inspections and good communication with tenants will help you keep the property in shape and your tenants happy. By following these steps, research, property prep, legal compliance, and good management, you'll set a solid foundation for a successful HMO investment. Now let's talk about something critical, HMO licensing. This is where a lot of new investors get tripped up, so listen closely. In the UK, specifically England and Wales, there are 3 types of licensing schemes that might apply to your HMO. Mandatory HMO licensing. This is a nationwide requirement. If your HMO is a large one, meaning it has 5 or more occupants from 2 or more households, you must have a HMO licence by law. This applies everywhere in England and Wales. Scotland has its own system. In other words, if you're renting to 5 or more unrelated people under one roof, mandatory licensing kicks in. The goal here is to ensure larger HMOs meet certain safety and quality standards given the higher number of people living together. And then you've got additional licensing. This is a local scheme that a council can choose to implement for a smaller HMO. Under additional licensing, a council can say any HMO with, say, 3 to 4 tenants, which is below the mandatory threshold, in a certain area must also be licensed. Not every council has additional licensing, but many do in areas with lots of shared houses. It's basically the council deciding to regulate small HMOs to maintain standards. So if you have a HMO that doesn't hit the 5 people threshold, you normally wouldn't need a mandatory licence. But if your council has an additional licensing scheme for that area, you'll need to get one. Always check with the local council's website or licensing team to see if an additional HMO licence applies to your property's location. And then we've got selective licensing. Now, this one isn't HMO specific, it's broader. Selective licensing means a council has designated a certain area, or citywide in some cases, where all rental properties must be licensed. This could include HMOs and regular single lets alike. Now, the idea behind selective licensing is to tackle issues like antisocial behaviour or poor housing conditions in that area by ensuring every landlord meets certain standards. If your HMO happens to be in selective licensing zone, you'll need to get a selective licence, even if it's a small 2-person let. Note that if your HMO already requires a HMO licence, which is mandatory or additional, you typically do not need a separate selective licence on top, but you still have to comply with whichever is applicable. Selective licensing is area-based, so it varies widely by location. In summary, licensing depends on two things: the size of your HMO and the local area rules. A large HMO always needs a license. Smaller HMOs might need one if the council says so. And certain areas require every landlord to license their rentals. Failing to get a required license is serious and it can lead to hefty fines or legal action. So make sure you check this early in your HMO journey. Usually your council's website will have a page to input an address and it tells you if you need a landlord or a HMO license. When in doubt, just call the council and ask about HMO licensing for the property. It's better to be safe than sorry. Operating an unlicensed HMO when one is required can result in penalties and you might have to repay the rent to the tenants under a rent repayment order. Don't forget planning permission. Okay, so you've wrapped your head around licensing. Now here's another piece of the puzzle: planning permission. This is completely separate from licensing, but it is just as important. While licensing is about you as a landlord meeting standards, planning is about the property's use and the impact on the neighbourhood. In planning terms, a typical family home is classed as a C3. A small HMO, usually up to 6 people, is classed as a C4. Changing a house from C3 to C4 use is often what you're doing when you create a HMO. The good news is, in many areas of the UK, moving from a family house to a small HMO is classed as a permitted development, meaning you don't need to apply for planning permission. It's an automatic right. However, councils can remove this automatic right by implementing an Article 4 direction. If an Article 4 is in place for your HMO area, it means you do need to apply for planning permission to convert a house into a small HMO. And many councils have done this in areas with a high concentration of shared housing. For instance, lots of university towns or city centres have Article 4 directions for HMOs to control their spread. So always check your local planning policies. An Article 4 area will require you to submit a planning application to change use from C3 to C4, even if it's just 3 or 4 tenants. For large HMOs, those falling outside of the C4 category altogether, they are considered as sui generis. For a 7 or more person HMO, you will always need full planning permission no matter where you are. The council will evaluate if the property and the location are suitable for many occupants. If required, you'd need to submit an application detailing your plans to use the property as a HMO. The council will consider factors like: is there adequate parking? Any likely noise or trash problems? Are there too many HMOs in the area already? Neighbours can sometimes object as well. This process can take a few months. You should secure planning approval before converting or operating the HMO, because if you proceed without it and you were supposed to have it, the council can issue an enforcement notice and you might have to cease using the property as a HMO or even revert it back to a single family layout. The main takeaway from all of this is licensing does not grant you planning permission, and vice versa. You might have a scenario where the council's licensing department gives you a HMO license, but the planning department says, actually, this area is an Article 4. You don't have permission for a HMO. And yes, that can actually happen. So ideally, you want both the planning and the licensing sorted to legally run your HMO. Many investors new to HMOs don't realise they may need a planning change of use. So don't fall into that trap. Always double check if the property is in an Article 4 area, or if a 6 or more person HMO is your plan, then planning permission is a must. Work with local planners if unsure. It can sound daunting, but plenty of applications get approved, especially if HMOs are common in that location. Just factor in the time and the possibility of cost of the application fees and a planning advisor as part of doing an HMO conversion. Now let's talk about real locations to give you a sense of how these rules play out on the ground. Different councils have different schemes, so it really depends on where your property is. And here's just a few notable examples. So Birmingham, one of the UK's largest cities. Birmingham has taken a strict stance on HMOs. In 2023, the council introduced a citywide additional licensing scheme for HMOs. This means any HMO in Birmingham with 3 or more people now needs a licence, even if it has fewer than 5 tenants. This new scheme is massive. It's expected to cover around 9,500 properties across all 69 wards of the city. That's on top of the 4,000 larger HMOs that were already licensed under the mandatory rules. The licence fee in Birmingham is around £755 for 5 years per property. So if you're investing in Birmingham, you basically cannot operate a HMO of any meaningful size without going through the council's licensing process. They implemented this to raise housing standards and address issues associated with high concentrations of HMOs in certain neighbourhoods, like around the universities. Nottingham is another city that has embraced widespread licensing. The City Council now runs all 3 types of schemes, mandatory, additional and selective, as of late 2023. In fact, Nottingham's selective licensing is so broad that it is estimated around 90% of all private rental properties in Nottingham now require some kind of licence. This includes HMOs and even simple buy-to-lets in many areas of the city. So if you buy a rental in Nottingham, odds are you're filling out a licence application. For HMOs specifically, Nottingham has additional licensing for smaller HMOs in certain areas, on top of the mandatory licence for 5+ beds. Always check the council's maps to see if your property's postcode falls within a licensing zone. In London, nearly every borough has its own twist. A famous example is Newham in East London. Newham was the first borough to introduce a borough-wide landlord licensing scheme back in 2013. Which they've since renewed. It covers tens of thousands of properties. Other boroughs like Waltham Forest, Brent, Redbridge, etc. have large selective licensing areas, and many central boroughs have additional licensing for HMOs. For instance, Camden and Westminster require even 3 or 4 person flat shares to be licensed as HMOs under their additional schemes. The bottom line is, in London, assume you probably do need a licence and then find out the specifics for that borough. The cost in London boroughs can range often between £500 to £1,000 for a licence, which is similar to elsewhere. As you can see, the trend is that more and more councils are implementing licensing schemes. It's seen as a way to enforce safety and equality in the private rented sector. So always assume you'll need to navigate this when doing a HMO. It's just part of the game now for investors. The good news is, once you're compliant, you're providing better housing and you're on the right side of the law, which is ultimately good for your investment in the long term. Just remember, check local requirements early. Don't buy a property expecting to rent it as a HMO without knowing what licences you'll need and whether the council is even open to new HMOs in that area. So we've touched on income, but let's drive home the potential numbers comparing HMOs to a traditional single let. It's one of the main reasons you might consider a HMO after all. For a quick recap, on average, HMOs produce significantly higher rental yields than a standard buy-to-let. I mentioned earlier that one report found the average is around about 7.5% for a HMO, whereas it's 3.6% for single lets in the UK. Now, that's a huge difference in return on investment. Higher yield means more rent relative to the property price. So £1,000 monthly rent on a £200,000 house is a 6% yield. With a HMO, you might be getting £1,500 to £2,000 on the same house, which could be a 9 to 12% yield. This is why HMOs can be so attractive financially. It's not just about percentage either, it's about cash flow. Let's illustrate with a concrete example. Suppose you buy a 3-bedroom house for a single family rental. Maybe you can rent it to the family for £900 a month. Now instead you convert it into a 4-bedroom HMO, perhaps by using the dining room or a lounge as an extra bedroom, and you rent each room out to individual tenants. If the tenant's paying £400 a month, which is £1,600, you've nearly doubled your gross rent. Even if you, the landlord, cover the council tax and utilities, let's say that's £300 a month, you still net around £1,300, which is £400 more than the single let scenario. Over a year, that's nearly £5,000 extra income from the same property. Of course, your expenses and effort are higher, more wear and tear, furnishing the rooms, licensing fees, etc. So it's not pure profit, but the net profit is typically still higher than it would be as a single household rental. Another angle, if you have a portfolio of single lets and you're looking for ways to increase your cash flow, is converting some suitable properties to HMO, which could significantly boost your monthly income. That said, it's crucial to factor in those extra costs. For example, HMO landlords often pay for gas, electricity, water, internet, council tax. So that needs to be budgeted. And a lot of landlords use utility warehouse to cover these bills. Many investors still find that even after paying those bills, a HMO yields more profit than a single let. The strategy shines especially in areas where property prices are moderate but rents are strong, commonly the case in secondary cities or university towns. In short, the income potential of HMOs is higher, which is why it's often described as a high yield strategy. Just remember that with high returns usually comes high responsibilities, which leads us to some words of caution. Before you run off to start your HMO empire, let's cover some of the common pitfalls and misconceptions that new HMO investors should be aware of. Knowing these can save you time, money, and headaches. Thinking it's easy money and underestimating the costs and the effort, yes, HMO can make more money, but they are not passive investments. A frequent mistake is underestimating the work and the cost involved. HMOs typically are more expensive to buy or convert. You might need a bigger property or to add fire doors, extra bathrooms, etc. And they definitely require more day-to-day management. You'll be dealing with multiple tenants, more phone calls, more chances something needs fixing. As one experienced investor put it, HMOs involve a lot more work, both in setting up and managing compared to a single let property. Also, budgeting needs to be thorough, remembering you'll likely be paying the utility bills, and those costs can eat into your profits if you're not careful. Maintenance costs are higher too. More occupants can mean more wear and tear on the property, appliances used more often, etc. So don't go in thinking it's a set and forget. Plan for higher operating expenses, cleaning communal areas, replacing furniture, etc., and possibly higher void costs too. It can still be very profitable, but only if you manage actively or hire someone who does. The next one is ignoring regulations. A dangerous misconception is assuming you can just start renting out rooms without dealing with all of the red tape. This can get you in serious trouble. As we discussed, most HMOs need a license of some sort. New investors sometimes think if they keep a property to 4 people, they're under the 5-person mandatory limit, so they're fine, only to discover their council had additional licensing and they actually needed the license anyway. Or they convert a garage to an extra bedroom that ends up being too small to be legally let. Never skip the legal checks. Councils are actively enforcing HMO rules and penalties are steep. Fines can reach up to £30,000 per offence if you break HMO regulations. There's also the risk of getting a ban or a criminal record for the worst breaches. So make sure you get the required licence and follow its conditions. This includes providing things like an annual gas safety certificate, providing electrical safety, smoke alarms, fire escapes, etc. If you don't view these as optional, they are mandatory. Also, some investors mistakenly think getting a HMO licence is the end of it. But as I mentioned, planning permission might also be needed. Overlooking the planning aspects, such as Article 4 areas, is a pitfall, and you could end up with a licensed HMO that violates planning rules, which is a mess to sort out. So compliance is key. Do the things by the book from the start. It protects your tenants and protects you from legal and financial calamity. Managing a HMO tenant group can be a different ballgame compared to one family. A misconception is tenants will just sort themselves out. In reality, expect to be, or the management company, to be a bit of a housemate mediator at times. Little disputes can arise over cleaning, noise, bathroom schedules, you name it. Careful tenant selection can mitigate this. For instance, you might want a similar profile of people, either all students or all young professionals in a similar age range to increase compatibility. Another pitfall is not doing strict referencing. You want reliable, responsible tenants because one bad apple can make the whole house unhappy. Also, be prepared for generally high turnover. Many HMO renters stay for a shorter term, like a year or two, and then move on, meaning you'll be reletting rooms more often than a single let where a family might stay for 3 to 5 years. Higher turnover means you need a system to advertise and fill rooms up quickly to keep that income up. It's wise to plan or use an agent for marketing the rooms and maybe stagger tenant contracts so not everyone leaves at once. Essentially, successful HMO landlording requires good people skills and good organisation. If you underestimate that, you might get overwhelmed. Another misconception is I can make any property a HMO and people will queue up to rent my rooms. The location is still critical for HMOs. You need to be in an area where people want to live in a shared house. If you buy a property in an area with low demand for room rentals, you could struggle to fill the rooms or have to charge very low rents. Always study the local market. Are there a lot of vacant HMO rooms advertised? What are the typical room rents? If the market is saturated with HMOs, or there are brand new purpose-built student accommodation blocks, or built to rent apartments in the area offering competition, you may find it harder to attract tenants. Also, some areas have community resistance to new HMOs, which can lead to stricter planning enforcement. So don't force a HMO in an area that doesn't naturally support one. Choose the right property in the right area for your target tenants. And definitely verify the area isn't subject to an Article 4 direction banning new HMOs. I've seen newcomers buy a house hoping to HMO it, only to find out after the purchase that the council had barred new HMOs in that neighbourhood, meaning planning permission would be refused. Due diligence up front saves you from this classic pitfall. To sum up the pitfalls, respect the rules, budget for the extra costs, and don't underestimate the management involved. If you do those, you'll avoid the common rookie mistakes. HMOs can be highly rewarding, but they require a professional approach. Treat it like a small housing business because that's what essentially it is. By now, you should have a solid understanding of what HMO investing entails, from what a HMO is to how it can turbocharge your rental income and the licenses, the permissions and the pitfalls that come along for the ride. HMOs can be fantastic investments for the right landlords, offering cash flow that single-let properties often can't match. Just remember that with great cash flow comes great responsibility. Higher returns means more to manage and more rules to follow. If you get educated, plan properly and stay on the right side of regulation, HMOs could very well be your ticket to higher rental profits and a diverse portfolio. Now it's over to you. Are you considering HMO investing, or do you have any experiences with house shares? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps others find this information. And subscribe to the channel for more tips on UK property investing. I cover everything from single lets to HMOs and beyond. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, happy investing.